You ever have one of those family reunions where you can feel the setup coming? Like, you're not just invited out of love or to reconnect. No, you're being summoned for a performance, a spotlight. Except the only role they've cast you in is the background character who claps at someone else's success. That was me, Josh. I'm 29, and this story starts with a text from my mom that just said, "Please come this time. Everyone wants to see you." Right. I hadn't gone to a family gathering in 3 years. Not because I'm bitter or dramatic. Okay, maybe a little, but mostly because they never felt like family. Every single event felt like a comparison game. Who bought a house? Who got engaged? Who had a kid? Who got a new job? And every time, someone, usually my Aunt Diane, would toss in a comment about how I was still finding myself, like I was a lost sock or something. I kept my distance after a while. Built my own thing. Quietly. No Facebook posts, no updates, no drama. But this time, something in my mom's voice and in my curiosity made me say yes. I'd been building my company for the past 4 years. It started as a niche recruiting platform for engineers. Then we pivoted into building tools for enterprise hiring. 6 months ago, we got acquired. Clean exit. The kind that changes everything. But I kept that quiet. My name wasn't on the headlines, and I liked it that way. I wasn't flashy. I liked being underestimated. The reunion was set for Saturday. Same place as always. My uncle's obnoxiously large house with the circular driveway, 3 SUVs out front, and that weird iron eagle above the garage like he was running some kind of secret society. I pulled up in my Tesla. Not that anyone noticed or cared. They were too busy swarming Ryan. Let me tell you about cousin Ryan. He's 26. Blonde, big smile, varsity jacket energy. He's the golden boy. Straight A's in high school, business degree, summer internships at big firms. Your classic LinkedIn warrior. The family loved him. And apparently, today was his coronation. The second I walked in, Aunt Diane grabbed me by the wrist. Like, physically grabbed me, and went, "Josh. Oh my God, you're here. Come say hi to Ryan. He just got hired at Nexera." Nexera. I knew the name. A fintech startup that got a round of funding recently. Some flashy headlines, a big valuation, and, unbeknownst to Aunt Diane, one of the companies my firm now technically owned. Not directly, but under our new parent company's umbrella. I blinked. "Oh wow," I said, smiling. "That's exciting." She leaned in and whispered like we were sharing gossip, except her voice carried enough to be heard by the next zip code. "He's going to be a millionaire before he's 30. He's just so brilliant." Then came the kicker. "Unlike some people," she added, letting that last part dangle like a cheap insult she thought I wouldn't catch. I smiled again. Not because I wasn't annoyed, but because this was the exact reason I came. Ryan was at the center of the backyard, surrounded by lawn chairs, lemonade, and admiration. He was talking about stock options like he discovered them himself. A small crowd of cousins and uncles nodded like disciples. "It's pre-IPO, so yeah, there's risk, but I'm not worried. We're scaling fast." The CEO knows me by name. I stood at the edge of the group, hands in my pockets, just observing. That's when Grandma asked the inevitable. "So Josh, honey, what are you up to these days?" The volume dipped. Not fully silent, but enough for me to feel a dozen heads tilt toward me like sunflowers chasing light. I considered giving my usual vague answer. "Oh, work's been good. Busy. But today felt different." I wasn't here to brag. I was here to remind them that I exist outside their expectations. "Not much," I said, sipping my drink. "I just signed Ryan's paycheck last week." Silence. Like, actual silence. I've never heard that many mouths close at once. Even Ryan blinked like he didn't understand what he'd heard. Aunt Diane's smile twitched. And that's when Grandpa, who's 82, hard of hearing, and usually half asleep, stood up from his lawn chair, leaned on his cane, and said, "Wait a damn minute." But before we get to what he said, let me rewind a little, because this moment wasn't just a witty comeback. It was 4 years in the making. And it started with a college dropout, a crappy apartment above a laundromat, and a family who thought I was wasting my life. See, when I left college at 21, everyone thought I'd lost my mind. My dad stopped talking to me for a month. My mom cried. Aunt Diane told everyone I'd probably end up delivering food or starting a band. I didn't care. I had an idea, and I wanted to build something. Not for clout. Not for applause. Just for me. But that decision cost me more than just their approval. And as I stood in that backyard, Watching their smug smiles fade into confusion, I remembered everything they said along the way. I remembered the birthday I wasn't invited to because they assumed I'd be too busy with my startup thing. I remembered the Thanksgiving where Ryan joked that I was technically unemployed, and everyone laughed, even my parents. I remembered every ignored text, every eye roll, every forced smile when I tried to explain what I was building and got nothing but blank stares. So no, my answer wasn't about flexing. It was about reclaiming space. And as Grandpa adjusted his hearing aid and looked around at the stunned crowd, I realized the best part hadn't even happened yet. Because they hadn't heard the full story. Not even close. Grandpa's voice cut through the silence like a rusty saw. Wait a damn minute. You signed his paycheck. He squinted over at me, then at Ryan. What does that even mean? All eyes turned to me again, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on my chest like a sandbag. My hand tightened around my drink. I hadn't meant to say it out loud like that. It just slipped. But now that it was hanging in the air, there was no taking it back. Ryan gave a short, awkward laugh. Haha, right, Josh. That's a good one. He looked around, hoping someone would join in. No one did. I smiled gently. Yeah, small world, right? But I didn't offer more. Not yet. Let them stew. Aunt Diane recovered first. She stood up straighter, tugged down her cardigan, and gave me that tight, dismissive smile she always used when she was trying to reassert control. Well, I'm sure that's a fun joke, Josh. But Ryan worked really hard to get where he is. He beat out over 100 candidates for his position. I know, I replied. I remember seeing the list. Another silence. Grandpa sat back down slowly, mumbling something about needing stronger coffee. Cousin Emily raised an eyebrow. Uncle Frank just looked confused. And Ryan looked scared. I could have ended it there. Said nothing more, let the curiosity simmer and walk away. But part of me, some deep, wounded part, wanted more than that. Not revenge, exactly. Just balance. And balance was long overdue. When I was 22, I moved back in with my parents after burning through my savings. I was working 16-hour days trying to code the first prototype of my platform, barely sleeping, and delivering groceries at night just to cover my student loans. At one point, I remember eating plain rice for dinner for 6 days straight. You think I exaggerate, but no. I have photos. I used to joke with my one friend back then that if I ever made it, I'd buy myself a gold-plated rice cooker. But the worst part wasn't the struggle. It was the pity. Every dinner with my family felt like an intervention. My mom would say things like, maybe you should just apply for something stable for now. You can always do your little business later. My dad would stare at the TV and grunt. My sister, Claire, who was in med school at the time, would chime in with stories about her residency and how she had no time for distractions like that. The unspoken message was always the same. Josh is wasting his potential. Josh needs to grow up. The day of Claire's graduation party, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. My mom whispered, I just hope he doesn't embarrass us in front of everyone. I didn't even cry that time. I just left before the speeches started. I stopped showing up after that. I built in silence. Learned in silence. Grew in silence. Back in the backyard, the buzz had shifted. Ryan was still talking, trying to salvage the attention. Something about his manager inviting him to a private Slack channel. But people weren't listening as closely. The sparkle was gone. Now they were looking at me. For the first time in years, they wanted to hear me. But before I could say anything else, Aunt Diane struck again. You know what I think, Josh? She said, folding her arms. I think you're jealous. You came here to cause a scene. You've always hated when someone else gets the spotlight. That stung. Not because it was true, but because she said it so easily, so publicly, like I'd been some bitter parasite my whole life. No, I said calmly. I came here because Mom asked me to. And because I was hoping, naively, I guess, that maybe this year would be different. Then she laughed. Different how? We're just proud of Ryan. He earned it. You don't get to come in here after disappearing for years and act like you're above everyone. I'm not above anyone, I said. But I'm not beneath you either. That's when the gloves came off. Really? Because last I checked, you dropped out of college, lived off your parents, and couldn't even hold a real job. Ryan has a career. He's going places. And you? What have you even done that's worth clapping for? I could feel the back of my neck heating up. I looked at my mom. She was biting her lip, eyes darting between us. My dad just stared down at his plate. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Claire walked over. She must have caught the last few lines. Her face was unreadable. You know, she said quietly, it wouldn't kill you to be happy for someone else's success. And that was it. Not the words. The weight behind them. The realization that even after all these years, even after everything I'd built, they still saw me as the family disappointment. Not a self-made entrepreneur. Not the guy who turned a broke idea into a multi-million-dollar exit. Not the man who stayed up late learning how to pitch, how to hire, how to survive. Just the dropout. The pity case. The failure. I left. Didn't storm out. Didn't make a scene. Just walked back to my car and drove away. I didn't go home. I parked by the old high school field where I used to eat lunch alone after quitting soccer. I stared at the empty bleachers and thought about every moment that had led me here. Every comment. Every slight. Every backhanded compliment. I called my old mentor. He picked up on the second ring. Josh, he said, everything okay? I paused. I think I want to do something petty. He laughed. Define petty. I want to invite my entire family to dinner next weekend. And I want to book it at the most expensive restaurant in the city. And I want to pay for everything. But only after they sit through a presentation. He didn't hesitate. Do it. So I did. I waited a few days. Let the tension simmer. Then I messaged my mom, asking her to help me invite everyone to a dinner to celebrate something important. She didn't ask too many questions. Just said she was glad I was trying to reconnect. I booked out the private room at the most luxurious restaurant in the city. The kind with gold menus, valet parking, and a sommelier that makes you feel like wine is a religion. I pre-ordered everything: steak, seafood, dessert, top-shelf drinks. Told them to spare no expense. Everyone RSVP'd yes. Of course they did. They thought it was about them. The night of the dinner, I wore a black suit and brought printed copies of something I'd been working on for a few days. It wasn't a presentation. It wasn't even flashy. It was a single page. A diagram. A breakdown of our company's organizational structure, before and after the acquisition. And there, in black and white, was Nexera, listed under our parent brand, with my name at the top, just beneath the CEO. I got to the restaurant early, greeted each family member as they arrived, smiled, took photos, listened to Aunt Diane talk about how Ryan had been handpicked for a new client project. Then, once everyone had their appetizers, I stood. I just want to say a few words, I began. But before I could, Ryan, poor, sweet Ryan, stood up and said, before you go, I just wanted to thank everyone for their support. This new job is a big deal for me, and I hope to make you all proud. Polite applause. I nodded. Thanks, Ryan. That's actually a great segue. I handed out the sheets. Watched them read. Watched their eyes widen. Watched Aunt Diane's mouth go slack. And then, I said the line I'd rehearsed in the mirror. You were right. Ryan is going places. And lucky for him, one of those places is under my supervision. Gasps. Forks dropped. And just as the silence threatened to swallow the room whole, Grandpa stood up. He didn't say a word at first. Just looked at me. Then looked at the page. Then at Ryan. Grandpa's hand trembled slightly as he set the paper down. His eyes stayed on me. Blue-gray, weathered with age, but still sharp in moments that mattered. The room was silent, almost reverent, like we'd all stepped into a church and nobody told the priest he could speak. He turned to Ryan, who had frozen with his champagne glass half lifted, and said slowly, You work for him? Ryan's throat bobbed. His eyes darted between me, his mom, the paper. No, I mean, not directly. He's not in my department. He doesn't, oversee me or anything. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The paper spoke for itself. My name was there. VP of Talent Infrastructure and Strategic Acquisitions. Under the new holding company's logo. Just beneath the executive board. Nexera was one of 5 acquisitions under our branch. I had signed Ryan's paycheck. He was technically 3 levels below me, 2 if you counted dotted line structure. I didn't flaunt it. I'd never even interacted with him on Slack. But the numbers didn't lie. I could have flagged his performance review if I wanted to. Approved, or declined, his bonus. I could have assigned his team to some obscure internal project just for fun. And every person in that room now knew it. Grandpa chuckled, then turned to Aunt Diane. Well, would you look at that? You were so busy puffing up the boy, you didn't see the man standing next to him. He looked back at me. I always knew you had fired Josh. The old man gave me a nod I hadn't seen since I was a kid trying to build model trains in his garage. Then he sat down and stabbed his steak with renewed enthusiasm. But the room hadn't caught up. Not yet. Claire was silent, looking down at the paper like it had betrayed her. My dad shifted uncomfortably, glancing at my mom like he needed permission to speak. Aunt Diane had gone completely pale, blinking like someone pulled the floor out from under her. And Ryan. Oh, Ryan. Looked like he wanted to disappear. But I wasn't gloating. I wasn't even angry anymore. That part had come and gone. What I felt, more than anything, was tired. And as I sat back down and took a slow sip of water, I realized this wasn't the ending. This was the middle. Let me take you back for a moment. Back to the part of the story I skipped over in the beginning. The part most people don't talk about when they make it. The part that hurts. After I left Claire's graduation party early, I moved out of my parents' house and into a place I could barely afford, above a laundromat, with a leaky ceiling and paper-thin walls. I worked nights delivering food and days building my startup, cobbling together code and clunky prototypes with tutorials and late-night forums. I had one friend, Jason, who believed in the idea, so he helped on weekends for free. The first version of the platform crashed constantly. The second was barely usable. The third started to work. We got our first paying user 14 months in. A small firm in Ohio. $99 a month. I cried when the Stripe notification hit. Not out of joy, but out of relief. I wasn't crazy. The night we hit $500 MRR, I bought 2 paper crowns from Burger King and made Jason wear one. We toasted with soda and talked like kings. But growth was slow. Money was tighter than ever. Every dollar that came in went to hosting fees, UX improvements, customer support. I didn't pay myself for 26 months. My parents didn't know that. They assumed I was freeloading. My dad once asked if I'd ever contribute to society. I nodded and changed the subject. I didn't go to family gatherings. Didn't answer texts. I lived in that in-between place. Too broke to feel successful, too stubborn to quit. And then came my lowest point. Year 3. We lost our biggest client due to a feature bug. Our churn spiked. Jason's mom got sick, and he had to step away. I was alone again. I maxed out my last credit card to keep the lights on. I applied for night shifts at a warehouse just to scrape by. That night, I sat in my car outside the warehouse orientation center, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, and asked myself, why? Why keep going? Why suffer? Why not just get a normal job and stop this madness? But something in me, something small, quiet, and angry, refused. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear of returning to those family dinners with nothing to show. Maybe it was the memory of Claire rolling her eyes when I told her about my idea. Whatever it was, it made me turn the key, drive back home, and fix the damn bug that night. 2 weeks later, we landed a call with an angel investor. And everything changed. His name was Mark. He wasn't flashy, just a practical guy who liked our idea and saw potential. He gave us $50,000 in seed money. Enough to breathe. Enough to hire one dev part-time. From there, we grew. Slowly, then faster. We signed new clients. Word got around. 2 years later, a VC firm made an offer. We countered, negotiated, signed. I moved into a real apartment. Jason came back. We brought on a team. A real team. Then came the acquisition. $12.8 million. Clean terms. No drama. I walked away with a healthy slice. Not enough to retire forever, but enough to never answer to anyone again. I stayed on for a new role, strategic acquisitions, and internal infrastructure. The part of the job where you get to help companies like ours grow smarter, faster, better. One of the first companies I helped acquire? Nexera. I didn't even know Ryan worked there until I saw his name on a personnel list months later. I laughed when I saw it, but I didn't say a word. Until the reunion. Back at the restaurant, I watched my family pick at their food, too proud to speak and too shaken to pretend nothing had happened. I gave a short toast. Thanked them for coming. Thanked my parents for raising me. Thanked Jason quietly. Then I paid the bill, every cent, and walked out. Not with my chest puffed out. Not with swagger. Just peace. But peace doesn't erase the past. The next week, my mom texted me. Can we talk? I called her. She didn't apologize right away. Just asked questions. Real ones. About the company. About my life. I told her about the nights in the laundromat. The rice. The tears. The quiet. She didn't say much. Just listened. I think that hurt her more than anything else I could have said. That she hadn't known. That I hadn't told her. That we'd lived under the same roof, and she had no idea I was drowning. She cried. I almost did. Claire sent me an email. Long, formal, apologetic. Said she admired me, even if she hadn't shown it. Said she was proud. I didn't reply right away. Not because I was angry, just because I wasn't sure I believed her yet. Ryan? He hasn't reached out. But I heard through the grapevine, he's keeping his head down at work now. Word travels. And it turns out, people are a little more careful when they realize the guy they once joked about now sits 3 rungs above them. As for Aunt Diane, she's been quiet on Facebook lately. No more brag posts. No more humble brags about Ryan. Just photos of her garden and passive-aggressive quotes about real success being quiet. I smile every time I see one. But here's the truth. Revenge felt good in the moment. But peace felt better. Not because they finally saw me, but because I finally saw myself. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need the validation. I'd spent so many years trying to prove I wasn't a failure that I forgot I already wasn't one. And maybe the real win wasn't that they knew now. It's that I didn't need them to. But still, this story isn't over. Because something else happened after that dinner. Something I didn't expect. Something that would flip the entire family dynamic again. And this time, not in my favor. It started with a voicemail. 3 weeks after the dinner, I was on a flight back from Chicago, bleary-eyed and running on 2 hours of sleep, when I landed and saw the notification. Missed call, Dad. Message, 1 minute, 23 seconds. We didn't talk often. Even after everything, our relationship hovered in this weird limbo where we were polite but distant, like 2 co-workers who used to be close but hadn't found their rhythm again. I played the message as I waited at the baggage carousel. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. Hey, Josh. Listen. Something's come up. Nothing urgent, don't worry. But your grandfather's been asking about you. Wants to see you. I think it's important. He's not saying much, but when he asks twice, I listen. Call me. That was all. My stomach tightened a little. Grandpa had always been sharp, but his health wasn't what it used to be. He still lived on his own, refused to move out of the house he'd built with his own 2 hands. But lately, my mom had been hinting he was slowing down. I called back the next morning. Josh, he boomed when he answered. You finally done playing with airplanes and meetings and all that jazz? I chuckled. Just landed. What's up? There was a long pause. Then, come over. Tomorrow if you can. There's something I want to show you. His house hadn't changed. The same peeling blue paint on the porch rails. The same wind chimes that clinked in the soft breeze. The same smell of coffee and cedar and something faintly medicinal that clung to old walls and older memories. He was waiting for me on the porch, wearing his usual suspenders and that flat cap that made him look like he'd walked off the set of a 1950s baseball game. You're late, he said, even though I was 5 minutes early. Nice to see you too, I replied. He waved me in without another word. Inside, he led me to his study, a cluttered room filled with tools, old maps, stacks of yellowed newspaper clippings, and a locked cabinet that hadn't been opened in decades. He sat down slowly in his worn leather chair and gestured to the opposite seat. Then he unlocked the cabinet, pulled out a manila folder, and handed it to me. Inside were a dozen old documents, property deeds, tax forms, letters, even a wrinkled photo of a lake house I barely remembered from childhood. My eyes skimmed the top page, confused. I don't understand, I said. What is this? That, Grandpa said slowly, is everything the family doesn't know about. I looked up. He leaned back, resting both hands on his cane. That lake house. It's been in the family since the 70s. Your grandmother and I bought it before any of your uncles got married. Never told anyone it was under my name only. Figured it'd be less of a fight when I passed. I kept reading. Property titles, dated signatures. My name on a few of them. Dated within the past year. You transferred these to me? He nodded. Started the paperwork months ago. Made it official last week. I blinked. Why me? Another pause. He stared at me with a strange intensity, like he was trying to see through my skin and into my bones. Because you showed me something they didn't. Grit. Fire. You earned everything you've got. They, your father, Diane, Claire, the rest, they all think success is owed to them because they check the right boxes. Good grades. Good schools. The right job titles. He leaned forward. But you? You built. And then you showed grace. You didn't rub it in their faces, even when you had the right to. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. He continued, quieter now. They think I'm leaving it all to your dad. Diane thinks Ryan's getting a share. But the truth is, I've watched how they treat people when they think they're above them. And I've watched how you stayed humble when you didn't have to. He tapped the folder. You're the executor now. You hold the key. And when the time comes, it's your call what happens next. My pulse picked up. Does anyone else know? He smiled. Nope. That's the fun part. I left his house feeling like someone had handed me a loaded weapon and told me to use it wisely. I didn't ask for this. Didn't even want it at first. But the more I thought about it, about the lake house, the accounts, the forgotten shares in an old family business that still produced a small but steady income, the more I realized what I'd been given. Leverage. And suddenly, memories started to resurface. Like Claire laughing in my face when I asked if she could look over a contract back in the early days of the company. I'm a doctor, not a magician, she'd said. Or Diane telling my mom behind my back that I was a hopeless case, and that they should start planning for when he comes crawling back. Or Ryan bragging at a wedding that some people think startups are a ticket to easy money but don't understand the real world. I remembered it all. And now? Now I held the strings. Over the next few weeks, I began to plan. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but because I wanted clarity, and a little justice, and maybe, just maybe a spectacle. First, I called my lawyer. Had him review every document Grandpa gave me, confirmed the transfers, filed the quiet paperwork to complete a few lingering deeds, set up protections, watched as the legal authority shifted in my name, bit by bit. Then I checked the old business registry for a company called Pinegrove Utility LLC. The family forgot about it after it was sold off in the late 2000s. But someone had kept a minority stake. That someone was Grandpa. And that 7% stake? Now mine. And that 7% had a new buyer knocking at the door. $280,000. I signed the papers. Suddenly, I had liquid cash and legal control over 3 parcels of land, 1 cabin, and a family trust account Diane didn't even know existed. The irony? The entire family thought Grandpa was getting forgetful, that he needed help managing his affairs. They were already circling like vultures, assuming that when he passed, they'd divvy up the leftovers. They had no idea the will had already changed. They had no idea I was the executor. They had no idea I now held the passwords to every account he ever touched. I waited until Thanksgiving. This time, the dinner was at Diane's house. It was the usual circus, roast turkey, polite insults, performative laughter. Ryan was quieter than usual, kept his head down. I caught him glancing at me now and then, like he still wasn't sure if he was allowed to be mad or impressed. Claire had brought her new boyfriend, a surgeon. She introduced him 3 times, as if we hadn't heard her the first 2. And Diane? Diane was in full hostess mode. This turkey is from that specialty farm near the vineyard. Nothing frozen here, she bragged. And we only use ceramic knives now. Better for the environment. I smiled. Said nothing. Let her talk. Let them all talk. Then, as dessert was served, I clinked my glass. Hey everyone, I said, standing. Can I have just 5 minutes? They all turned. Even Grandpa looked up from his pumpkin pie. I pulled out a small, black folder. Laid it gently on the table. This, I said, is the updated deed to the lake house. Diane blinked. The lake house. It's in my name now, I said calmly. Grandpa transferred it last month, along with a few other assets. You could hear the blood drain from faces. Claire frowned. What are you talking about? I opened the folder to the notarized document, turned it around for everyone to see. Aunt Diane went stiff. That has to be a mistake. That property belongs to the family. To us. Grandpa cleared his throat. I am the family, he said, and I made my choice. I let that hang for a second before continuing. I'm not doing anything with it right now, but I will be restructuring a few things, which means if anyone had plans to use the house next summer without permission, they might want to rethink that. Claire's boyfriend started to excuse himself. Ryan looked like he'd swallowed a spoon. Diane stood abruptly. This is insane. This is manipulation. You convinced an old man to sign over our family's property. No, Grandpa said firmly. I gave it to someone who earned it. But I also made him executor, Grandpa added. When I pass, Josh's final say. Over everything. The silence that followed was not like the dinner silence from before. This one was heavy, ugly, final. But I wasn't done yet. Because this wasn't just about land or money. This was about truth. and it was time to show them what truth looked like when it walked in the room with a folder and a plan. And that's when I dropped the final envelope on the table. Diane's name printed on the front. Inside, something she'd never seen coming. Something she should have remembered. A mistake she made years ago. And I had the receipts. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because when she opened that envelope, and her face changed, that's when everything truly started to unravel. Diane's fingers trembled as she slid the paper out of the envelope. She unfolded it with the caution of someone who already knew they were holding something dangerous. Her eyes scanned the page, moving faster as her breath caught. By the time she hit the signature at the bottom, her face had gone completely still, expressionless, but pale in a way that gave everything away. I didn't say a word. I wanted her to speak first. "Where did you get this?" she finally whispered, clutching the paper a little too tightly. "It was in one of Grandpa's old files," I said calmly, "with the rest of the trust documents." "You went through his private things?" she snapped, her voice rising an octave, desperate now. "You manipulated him. You must have. He would never give you this. You've always hated me." "Stop," Grandpa said, voice low but firm. "He didn't manipulate anything. I gave it to him." The room went silent again, but this time it was vibrating under the surface, like the air was waiting to crack. Claire leaned over to peek at the document in Diane's hands. "What is it?" I turned to Claire, slowly, almost theatrically. "A promissory note," I said, "signed by Aunt Diane 23 years ago, for a $37,000 loan that Grandpa gave her and Uncle Ron when they wanted to start that landscaping business. The one that failed after a year." Diane's eyes went wide. "He said it was a gift. We were family, and it was. He said not to worry about it." Grandpa shook his head. I said, "Don't worry about paying it yet. I never forgave that debt. I just waited. Waited to see if you'd bring it up. You never did." She was stammering now, rage and fear colliding behind her eyes. "That was 20 years ago. It's irrelevant now. And anyway, any lawyer would say the statute of limitations. It's not about suing you," I said, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "It's about family. About fairness. You've spent decades treating everyone like they were beneath you, bragging about your money, making jabs about people's careers, their choices. My mom, my dad, me. And the whole time, you never once thought about the help you got to get started." Claire spoke up, cautious now. "Okay, but that was a long time ago, Josh. Why bring this up now?" "Because," I said, turning to face the entire room, "this family has spent years rewarding arrogance and punishing humility. I watched all of you treat me like I was broken just because I didn't follow the same path you did. You mocked me for building something from scratch. You belittled me when I was at my lowest. You ignored me unless you needed something to gossip about. And now," I paused, let the tension rise. "Now, I'm the one holding the keys. To the property, to the accounts, to this family's legacy." Diane stood up. "You're just doing this for revenge. You always were jealous of Ryan, of Claire." I tilted my head. "You keep saying that word. Jealous. But let's be honest. What exactly is it you think I'm jealous of?" No one answered. So I kept going. "Claire's success? She earned that. I respect her. Even if she's cold sometimes, at least she works for what she has." Claire stiffened but didn't interrupt. "Ryan? I was never jealous of him. But you made sure the entire family believed I should be. Every dinner, every party. You made him the star and made me the cautionary tale. You created a narrative and fed it until it became gospel. Well, guess what? The story changed." Grandpa chuckled softly. I turned back to Diane. "You owe $37,000. I don't need the money, but I do want a statement. A signed letter acknowledging the loan, the terms, and that you misrepresented it as a gift to avoid repayment." She scoffed. "You're joking." I pulled out another sheet from the folder. "I've drafted it for you. You can't make me sign that." "No," I said. "But if you don't, I'll file it with Grandpa's full estate records. And then you'll be in violation of a promissory agreement under the terms of the updated trust, which gives me the right to legally bar you from inheritance distribution for failure to acknowledge debts to the trust originator." Diane's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ryan looked like he was watching a live car crash and wasn't sure which side of the windshield he was on. Claire sat perfectly still, eyes locked on me, no longer angry, just curious. For once, really listening. I turned to the group. "And just so everyone's clear, this isn't about punishing her. It's about accountability. I was called a failure for years. I was left out of birthdays, mocked at reunions, judged for not being on the same timeline as everyone else. Now that I'm successful, you want me to pretend none of that happened? I shook my head. I won't. I'm not looking for applause, but I am looking for honesty. So here's how it's going to go. I looked each of them in the eye. 1. If you want access to the lake house, you come through me. 2. I will be revising the family trust rules. That includes limiting access to discretionary funds and implementing contribution-based equity for future use of any shared properties. 3. No more backroom deals. No more he said, she said. I'll be setting up quarterly reports for any shared assets. Full transparency. I looked at Claire. You're a doctor. You understand systems. If you want to help me manage this as co-executor, I'd welcome it. But not as a favor to me. As an act of atonement. She nodded slowly. I'd be okay with that. 4. Ryan. He looked up, startled like I'd called on him in class. You don't owe me anything. But we're in the same company now. If you ever want to talk about your role, or your growth, or how to actually succeed in the startup world, my door's open. But I'm not protecting you. If you slack off, you'll be fired like anyone else. Earn your place. He nodded once, hesitant, but grateful. And 5, I said, turning back to Diane. You have until the end of the weekend to sign that letter, or your name is off the list. She stared at me, then slowly sat down. She didn't say another word for the rest of the night. The fallout wasn't immediate. It trickled in over the weeks that followed. First came the apology texts. From Claire. From my mom. Even from cousins who hadn't said 2 words to me in years. Everyone was suddenly reflective, suddenly interested in my journey, in learning more about what you went through. I responded when I could. Politely, but not always warmly. Some bridges, once burned, don't need rebuilding. Ryan started showing up to work earlier. I noticed his Slack activity. I noticed him asking smarter questions. He was trying, in his own way, to change. And I respected that. A month later, Claire invited me to a hospital fundraiser she was speaking at. I went. She introduced me as my brilliant brother who built something from scratch when none of us believed in him. It wasn't performative. It was real. That night we talked. Not about the past. About the future. We weren't best friends again. But we were finally walking the same direction. Diane. She signed the letter. Eventually. But she hasn't spoken to me since. I'm okay with that. She doesn't control the narrative anymore. As for me, I still run my division at the company. Still invest in small startups. Still live in the same apartment. Still drive the same Tesla. But I visit the lake house now. Fixed it up. I spend weekends there sometimes, alone or with people I actually care about. I built a fire pit out back. Put in a new dock. Planted trees. Peaceful. Quiet. No tension. No comparisons. No noise. Just me, the water, and the crackle of the fire. It's not about money. It never was. It's about knowing who you are when no one's clapping for you, and knowing who they are when the clapping stops. That's the real inheritance.